Hey, dear friends. This is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we're going to look at a disturbing case, so let's dive into the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Chapter 1. The Prelude to a Tragedy. The horrific murder that shocked all of Canada happened by sheer chance, triggered by the pathological lies of a criminal who got tangled in a web of his own deceit. Brett Rayan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large, close-knit family. Besides him, the Rayan couple had 3 more sons, older Christopher and Leland and younger AJ. The parents, who advocated for a healthy lifestyle, tried to instill the right values in their children. The head of the family worked at a newspaper and moonlighted as a fitness coach in his spare time. The mother devoted herself to housekeeping and growing flowers, which was her passion. The woman had to be strict, sometimes even harsh in raising 4 boys, while the father was known for his gentleness and restraint. Each of the sons followed his own path in life. Chris worked as a conductor and was very modest. Leland found his calling in photography and music, and Brett was always described as a gregarious, cheerful guy. Chapter 2. Brett's Academic and Financial Woes. After finishing school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto but quickly encountered difficulties with his studies. The young man went through 2 painful breakups with girls, after which he couldn't focus at all on preparing for exams and eventually dropped out of college. He watched with envy as his friends and classmates built relationships, got married, and achieved success, while he couldn't get anything right. This bred a sense of failure in Brett. After getting a job as a painter, the guy realized this wasn't for him. At the same time, Brett loved himself, strived to look good, and spent a lot of money on his own needs and on girls. Because of this, he accumulated a large debt, 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. Creditors started demanding their money back, which plunged Brett into a deep depression. The young man felt like a total loser, but never confessed his problems to anyone. Chapter 3. Brett's Bank Robbery Plan. Desperately trying to find a way out of his predicament and quickly get his hands on a large sum of money, Brett resolved to rob a bank. On October 20th, 2007, he set his plan in motion. The guy chose a financial institution not far from his house. To disguise himself, he wrapped his face in bandages and faked an injury to his left arm. Pretending to limp and carrying a stack of papers, Brett entered the bank posing as a sick man. Approaching the teller, he handed the cashier a note demanding money and threatening that he had a weapon hidden in his bandages. The frightened employee quickly gave the robber all the cash from the register, but it turned out to be just a little over $1,000. Although Brett wasn't happy with this amount, he decided not to draw extra attention, swiftly grabbed the money, and vanished from the crime scene. Despite the security cameras recording the robbery, Brett managed to avoid arrest. Feeling a sense of impunity, he continued robbing banks, but in other parts of the city. Changing his disguise tactics to a hat and a fake beard, the young man became more cautious. In total, Brett robbed 12 banks, netting over $28,000 in loot. Chapter 4. The Unmasking and Imprisonment of the Robber. Eventually, the police managed to track down the brazen robber, and on June 20th, 2008, 28-year-old Brett was arrested during an attempted robbery. The guy's family was in deep shock, as Brett had once volunteered at a children's hospital and had now turned into a criminal. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. While serving his sentence, experts evaluated the convict's mental state and found no signs of aggression or propensity for violence. Throughout his time, Brett never used prohibited substances and had no mental disorders. Moreover, due to his exemplary behavior, he was granted parole after 2 years. The prison staff were simply charmed by this pleasant, charismatic, and hard-working young man. In their opinion, he had just made a fatal mistake due to the burden of debt and deserved a second chance. Brett's profile stated that he was a model prisoner with minimal risk of reoffending. Chapter 5. Brett's attempts to start a new life. According to the terms of his parole, Brett had to undergo a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships, with girls or at work. After all, these were the factors that could trigger him to relapse. But despite his sincere intentions to start a new life, reality proved to be much more complicated. The debts didn't go away, and there was no way to pay them off. Finding a job with a criminal record turned out to be extremely difficult. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict even as a painter. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. His parents came to the rescue, supporting their son financially. This allowed him to resume his studies at the university, but this time in the information technology department. Brett also continued to visit a psychotherapist by court order and diligently tried to put his life back together. It was during therapy that he was advised to be more honest and open with those around him. Chapter 6. Brett and Kristen's fateful meeting. One day in September 2011, Brett's friend set him up on a blind date with a pretty girl named Kristen Baxter. She worked as a physiotherapist, lived in her own apartment with her little dog, and loved to travel. A spark instantly ignited between Brett and Kristen. They immediately hit it off and felt a mutual attraction. The young people were united by common interests. Brett, like Kristen, adored animals and travel. Soon they started dating. The couple spent a lot of time together, attended sports events, and went on hikes. Brett even accompanied Kristen and her family on a vacation to the Bahamas. Plus, the girl's dog immediately took a liking to him. It seemed that Brett's life was finally getting back on track, and he was no longer drawn to dubious ventures. He longed for a quiet and cozy life next to his beloved girlfriend. In January 2013, Brett moved into Kristen's apartment, marking a new stage in their relationship. The couple began to think about getting married. Chapter 7. Hiding the truth from his beloved. A new life began for Brett. The young man who had grown up in a quiet suburb was now immersed in the bustle of vibrant city life with its numerous restaurants, shops, and interesting places. The young couple enjoyed visiting cozy eateries together and taking evening swims in the pool. However, as it turned out, all this time, while Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was only studying, living on his parents' money. The couple often traveled to warm countries together. Brett's father suddenly passed away. The young man temporarily moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. That's when he confessed to Susan that he was madly in love with Kristen and dreamed of marrying her. However, he didn't have the money for a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated with the proposal. Touched by her son's words, his mother handed him money for an expensive ring. Brett bought a luxurious diamond ring and proposed to Kristen. Beaming with happiness, the girl said yes. The couple immersed themselves in pleasant wedding preparations. Brett even looked for side jobs to be able to surprise his beloved and shower her with gifts, but these were insignificant sums. The guy had no idea how he would provide for a family in the future. He carefully concealed from his fiancée his problems with the law, bankruptcy, and debts. Abandoning his futile studies, Brett focused on finding a decent job. Chapter 8. A failed attempt to get a job. At the beginning of 2016, fortune finally smiled upon Brett. He got a good job in the field of information technology. The guy joyfully shared this news with Kristen, and the couple decided to celebrate the occasion with family. However, as soon as his new employer learned about his criminal past, they immediately refused to hire him. This was a crushing blow to Brett's ego. Not wanting to upset his beloved, he decided not to tell her about yet another failure. Instead, Brett pretended that he would be working remotely from home. While Kristen was getting ready for work, he pretended to be working at the computer. The girl was happy that they would finally get on their feet and Brett would start earning good money. She enthusiastically prepared for the wedding, scheduled for September 16, 2016, choosing the most beautiful and expensive options, as they could now supposedly afford it. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony. The pre-wedding bachelor party was planned to be celebrated at a posh ski resort. The couple even started looking at a spacious and cozy house where they dreamed of settling after the wedding, as they were tired of being cramped in a small apartment. Susan was overjoyed, believing that her son had finally gotten on his feet, graduated from university, and found a high-paying job. The woman eagerly anticipated the wedding and Brett's move into his own home. Chapter 9. Brett's lies exposed. But in reality, this was all a blatant lie. Brett had nothing to his name but deceit. He got so tangled up in a web of his own fabrications that he couldn't extricate himself from it. In desperate attempts to get money, the guy took any side job he could find and even helped his mother around the house for pay. He came to her every day, looking for things to fix or do around the house to receive financial rewards. Susan found her son's insistence suspicious, as he hung around her house all day long, constantly tinkering with something instead of working. If Brett was earning as well as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs, the woman wondered. She started asking her son uncomfortable questions, which he initially tried to dodge. But then, remembering the therapist's advice about the importance of honesty, Brett finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged Susan for substantial financial assistance, promising to keep looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed with her son's life failures. She was filled with indignation that Brett hadn't even managed to finish university and get an education. Susan flatly refused to give him money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Chapter 10. The Birth of a Criminal Plan. His mother's harsh words infuriated Brett. He was seized by a panic fear that Kristen would leave him if she learned the truth. The guy was desperate to avoid this at all costs. More than anything in the world, he feared ending up on the streets again, without his beloved girlfriend and returning under his mother's care. Brett didn't want to feel like a miserable loser for the rest of his life. And then a monstrous plan took shape in his head. Since his criminal record prevented him from legally purchasing firearms, Brett decided to get a crossbow. To avoid attracting undue attention, the guy bought a used crossbow for cash. The next day, Brett went to his mother's house again, supposedly to help with repairs for money. Chapter 11. The Bloody Massacre. On August 25th, 2016, Kristen woke up early as usual and went to work to see her patients. Brett pretended to stay home and work, but in fact, he started getting ready to go to his mother's. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy. To avoid suspicion, he needed an alibi. The resourceful Brett crafted a device that imitated him working at the computer by periodically pressing keys. In addition, he set up automatic email sending at a specific time. Next, Brett packed all the necessary items for his disguise into a sports bag, including clothes and a wig. Slipping out of the house unnoticed through the fire escape to avoid being captured by surveillance cameras, the guy headed to Susan's place. Just as stealthily, in a mask and wig so that no one would recognize him, Brett arrived at his mother's house. On the doorstep, he took off all his disguise and went inside. Once again, Brett tried to talk to his mother and convince her to help him with money, but Susan was unyielding. A fierce argument broke out between them. The woman insisted that her son confess his lies to Kristen himself. Otherwise, she threatened to expose him on her own. Meanwhile, the quarrel flared up with renewed vigor. Sensing something was wrong, Susan took advantage of the moment when Brett briefly stepped out and urgently called her eldest son, Chris. She begged him to come over and help deal with the conflict with Brett. And Brett went to the garage for a reason. He had hidden a crossbow there in advance. Returning with the weapon, the guy started fiddling with it, setting everything up for the shot. This task turned out to be not so simple and took some time. Suddenly, his mother entered the garage. In a fit of blind rage, Brett grabbed the first tool he could find and struck Susan twice, hitting her cheek and ear. The woman screamed in pain, shocked that her own son had raised a hand against her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around in a tangle, knocking everything down in their path. Brett groped for a long, dirty rag and, without much thought, strangled his 63-year-old mother with it. Only after committing the deed did it begin to dawn on him that everything had gone wrong. The perfect murder had turned into a nightmare. The guy suddenly remembered that Chris, summoned by his mother, was about to arrive. Upon seeing her body, his older brother would immediately realize whose handiwork this was. Without much hesitation, Brett decided to get rid of Chris as an unwanted witness. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started fiddling with it again. Now a plan to kill his brother was brewing in Brett's head. Having prepared everything for the new crime, he lurked in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, the unsuspecting 42-year-old man crossed the threshold in search of his mother. At that moment, Brett silently approached him from behind and shot him point blank in the back of the head. Chris instantly fell dead. Brett dragged his bloodied body over to his mother's corpse and covered them with a tarp. The guy rushed to grab his bag of clothes to quickly change and flee. Unexpectedly, Brett's younger brother, 29-year-old AJ, appeared at the doorstep of his mother's house coming for a visit. For Brett, this was a real catastrophe. He frantically pondered what to do next: change clothes and run, or stay and kill AJ too. Brett feared that his younger brother, upon discovering the bodies, would immediately call the police, and then he would certainly be caught. This pushed the guy to commit yet another gruesome murder. After tracking down AJ, Brett followed him, holding the crossbow at the ready. He crept up to his unsuspecting victim with the intention of cunningly shooting him in the back of the head, just like Chris. But this time, something went wrong. AJ sensed danger and noticed the armed Brett. A life-and-death fight broke out between the brothers. At some point, Brett managed to wound AJ, hitting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and collapsed exhausted in the driveway. It turned out that there was another brother in the house, 39-year-old Leland, who had been carelessly sleeping this whole time. He was awakened by AJ's horrific scream. Looking out the window, Leland saw his bloodied brother on the path. The man rushed to the phone to call 911, but he didn't make it. At that very moment, a crazed Brett pounced on him. A fierce fight broke out between the brothers, which rolled through the entire house, turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of the moment when Brett was distracted, the wounded Leland managed to slip out unnoticed, crawl to the neighbors, and lose consciousness on their doorstep. The good people immediately called the police. Meanwhile, the enraged Brett dashed back into the yard, catching a glimpse of the wounded AJ, who was trying to crawl away, bleeding. Obsessed with the desire to finish off his younger brother at all costs before he attracted the neighbors' attention, Brett chased after him. Chapter 12. The finale of the bloody drama. As he pursued AJ, Brett suddenly saw that Leland had managed to fully rat him out to the neighbors. From that point on, the guy no longer had any chance of salvation. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody odyssey. The brilliant plan for the perfect murder had crumbled to pieces. In despair, Brett decided to surrender. Unhurriedly, he returned to his mother's house, grabbed a bottle of water, and settled on the porch, patiently waiting for the arrival of law enforcement. When the first patrol cars and an ambulance pulled up, the medics immediately pronounced Susan and Chris dead. AJ was still showing signs of life, but was in extremely critical condition. On the way to the hospital, he died from his injuries. As for Leland, although he was hurt, he survived. He was urgently hospitalized and provided with the necessary medical care. Over time, the man began to recover. Chapter 13. The shocking truth: for Kristen Brett was arrested at the crime scene and faced terrible charges of triple first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news stunned Kristen, as there were only 3 weeks left until the wedding. The unfortunate bride learned the horrifying truth about her beloved for the first time: his criminal past, conviction for robbery, financial problems, lack of a job, and the gruesome murder of his own family. How could she have lived under the same roof with this monster for so long? The shocked girl immediately canceled the wedding. Returning to the apartment, Kristen discovered the contraption Brett had crafted himself for his alibi. Not understanding what this strange gadget was, she mistook it for an explosive device and frantically called the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, promptly evacuated the building's residents, and began cautiously examining the mysterious device. It soon became clear that it posed no danger, but the cops were amazed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and scrupulousness. One couldn't deny his intelligence and inner strength, which unfortunately he had channeled in the wrong direction. If only Brett had chosen the right path in life from a young age, his potential could have brought much good to society. Chapter 14. Admission of Guilt and Sentencing. At the court hearing, Brett decided to plead guilty. He made a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to have his actions qualified as a triple second-degree murder. Trying to mitigate the sentence, the guy claimed that he had only planned to scare his mother with the crossbow and have a serious conversation with her. Allegedly, he wanted Susan to finally understand and support him. But unfortunately, everything got out of control. Brett swore that he had not intended to do anything to his brothers. They had simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the prosecution insisted otherwise. In their firm belief, the defendant had planned from the very beginning to brutally deal with his mother, not just talk to her. The prosecutors argued that Brett had taken the crossbow with him specifically to kill Susan, and therefore must face severe responsibility. As a result, the guy was found guilty of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brothers. The court handed down a harsh sentence: 3 life terms with the right to parole no earlier than 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All punishments are to be served simultaneously. This means that the guy will only be able to seek early release in a quarter of a century. The sole surviving brother Leland greeted the verdict with relief. Despite all the pain and bitterness of loss, he sincerely respected Brett for his expressed remorse. In Leland's deep conviction, his younger brother was not a bad person at heart, but had unfortunately become hopelessly lost in life. Brett had stepped onto the slippery path of deceit and eventually got completely mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer extricate himself from it, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Rayan's horrific story serves as a warning to us all. It vividly demonstrates how seemingly small lies and concealing the truth can lead to dire consequences. At some point, the lies grow, accumulating new details, and become uncontrollable, ruining not only the deceiver's life, but also the lives of their loved ones. Brett had every chance to get on the right track after his first prison term. He had the support of his beloved girlfriend and family. He could have gotten an education and found a job. However, the guy chose a different path, the path of untruth, which ultimately led to a terrible tragedy and destroyed more than one life. It doesn't matter whether Brett acknowledged his mistake sincerely or if his remorse was merely a way to soften the sentence. What's much more important is what conclusions he will draw himself while serving his life sentence. Will he be able to rethink his life and at least try to become a better version of himself? Only Brett himself knows the answer. However, his story definitely makes us reflect on our own actions. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize once again, honesty and responsibility are not just pretty words, but a vital necessity. It's important to value our loved ones, trust them, and share our problems with them. After all, it's much easier to overcome difficulties together and find a way out, even from seemingly hopeless situations. Only on a solid foundation of truth, trust, and mutual support can we build a happy future. And perhaps had Brett Rayan known this, he would have never set foot on the wrong path that led him behind bars. This story should serve as a lesson and reminder to all of us that our most precious treasure in life is our family and loved ones. So let's cherish them, respect them, and above all, be honest with ourselves, because self-deception is the first step towards a real-life tragedy.